Thanks so much for being with us during this session. Today, we're here to talk about the Good Cause Eviction Screener and how we're using data-driven techniques to bolster tenant rights in New York City. Next. Thank you. My name is Kiwon Sim. I'm a senior software engineer at JustFix, and my partner today is...
Hi, I'm Corey. I'm the product design lead at JustFix.
Cool. And we're super excited to be here. This is both of our first times at the School of Data, and this is really awesome. Next, please. All right, so we are going to talk a little bit about JustFix and our tools because it provides a little context into why we were the ones who were approached to make the Good Cause Eviction Screener. Next. So JustFix is a nonprofit based in New York City. We make tools for tenants to advocate for their rights, and we have two big suites of products that we make. So first, we make tools for tenant action and self-advocacy, and the second types of tools that we make are data for systems change tools. And I'll go over really quickly some examples of those tools that we have built and are live currently. So first, a tool that we have, I think this is our longest running tool. This is a letter of complaint tool where tenants are able to document their conditions and request repairs to their landlords through this online portal where we'll send a legally vetted letter to the landlord through USPS certified mail, which seems like extra official. So they often will get scared into making action. So that's good. So this is one of our products that is longest running to date. And this is a tenant self-advocacy tool. Another tool that we have is called Rent History. So this tool was started so that folks can start requesting their rent history to the DHCR. And once you get your rent history for your apartment, you are able to figure out if your unit is rent stabilized, and also if you are being illegally overcharged. And there are folks who have used this service who have found out that they're being overcharged for a lot of money and have being able to gotten that back. Another product that we currently have live is called Eviction Free NYC. And that was developed in collaboration with Right to Counsel Coalition. And this is a tool that helps folks who are navigating housing court to figure out if they qualify for free legal counsel under the Right to Counsel law. And if you don't qualify for whatever reason, it still helps you navigate the housing court to hopefully have it be a little more easeful process in a stressful time. And now, kind of stepping back and looking at the other suite of products we have, it's products that there's one big product that we have called Who Owns What that helps uncover data for systemic change. So this is a tool that I think is the most used out of all of our products. A lot of tenant organizers, advocates, and just tenants across the city use this product to uncover landlord networks, figure out ownership information for their buildings, and also get really helpful information just about the baseline statistics of their buildings. So, how many complaints and violations from HPD are they receiving? And just more, this website updates every day. So this is like a really quick and easy way to find out the most updated information about your building. So now stepping back, there's this Venn diagram of tools that JustFix has. And today we're here to talk about the Good Cause Eviction Screener. And next. That, for us, fits squarely in this Venn diagram of having self-advocacy tools for tenants, but also using all the data that we have through the open data portals to help tenants make the most informed decision possible when they are trying to figure out if they qualify for good cause.
So I'm going to start talking about, good cause eviction, a little bit of an overview of the law and the process that we went through in creating this product. So next slide. Little bit of context. About a year ago, April 20th, 2024, the Good Cause Eviction law passed in New York. And so before that, unregulated tenants were unable to ensure that they would be able to stay in their homes once their lease ended, since unlike regulated tenants, those tenants being rent stabilized, subsidized tenants, they don't have a right to lease renewal. So the Good Cause Eviction law provides regulations for the first time for market rate tenants. However, there's very specific criteria in order to qualify for coverage under the law. A little bit of background. So about a year ago, right when the law passed, State Senator Salazar and another great organization, Housing Justice for All, approached JustFix to try to create a tool that helps tenants understand their coverage. Next slide. And so really a little bit more background on the law. The Good Cause provides three main protections for market rate tenants. The first being protections against evictions for no reason, so that tenants don't have to fear retaliation from their landlord when they demand repairs or organize with their neighbors. The second one is guaranteed lease renewals, or the ability to stay in your home without a month-to-month lease. And the third is the ability to challenge rent hikes that are more than 10% or the consumer price index plus 5%, whichever is lower. So right now it's 8.82 in New York City and 8.45% in upstate. So essentially what that means is that if someone who's covered by Good Cause Eviction gets a new lease and their landlord has a rent increase that exceeds 8.82%, they have the ability to challenge that. All right, so next slide. So the problem here is that in order to assert their rights, their landlord tenants need to know if they're covered, right? But due to the complexities and the exclusions of the law, it's really not all that easy for tenants to understand if they're eligible. And you can kind of see on the right, like that is just a little bit of an example of some of the resources online that a tenant would have to scrub through to understand their coverage status. So if you go to the next slide. So our goal was to really just develop a tool that assesses and communicates tenants' coverage under Good Cause by combining publicly available data as well as readily available information that tenants can provide us. Next slide. So we built a website, and essentially this is how it works. Tenant can go to the Good Cause NYC website. They'll take a very quick, simple survey. The website will tell them their coverage status, and then ultimately a tenant is empowered to exercise their rights, whether they're covered or not. That's a big part of it. Next. This is quickly just a little bit of visual context. We're going to jump into a demo, but basically tenant enters their address, sees it on the map, confirm, answer a few quick questions. How many bedrooms, rent stabilization status, subsidy status, see your results, and we give them the result. In this case, they're likely covered, and we show all their criteria of their living situation compared to the criteria of the law, and a few more information about exercising their rights, asserting their rights, the protections they have. Next slide. So I'm going to speak a bit about the design and development process that went into creating this product. Couple keys to success. The first one is prototyping from the start. That was a huge piece for us. So right when we started this product, we kind of started with some sketches, some initial designs, but we were really fortunate to have awesome developers working with us on our engineering team at JustFix, and we were able to have prototypes evolve alongside the designs, which kind of enabled our second key to success, which was this ability to have a continuous feedback loop with experts and tenants throughout the project. So because we had a functioning prototype essentially from the start, we were able to have, really just like continuous workshops and sessions with experts and partners of JustFix who were more intimately familiar with the law and who are more on the ground with tenants who are, looking to understand their coverage. We also were able to provide this prototype to potential users, so to tenants in New York City, to get feedback as to certain use, basically do rounds of usability testing. And those keys to success really kind of informed three principles that emerged as we went through this process. And those principles were making the screener as easy and as straightforward as possible, clearly communicating coverage, and providing resources for people who are unsure of the certain aspects of their vetting situation. Next slide. So when we think about making the screener as easy and as straightforward as possible, what we wanted to do was minimize the amount of questions and provide helpful and transparent, helper text and throughout the screener. So D1 will speak in a little bit more about how we leverage data to do both of those things, but that was a key principle. So these are the questions. Most tenants are going to answer 4 questions, as you just saw in that real quick overview. How many bedrooms, what's your rent, are you stabilized, and do you live in a subsidized building? Edge cases would be tenants with living in smaller buildings who were unsure of if their landlord owns more buildings. They would have 2 more questions to answer. So at max, the tenant is really going to answer 6 questions to understand their coverage. The second principle was clearly communicating the coverage. So we wanted to communicate to tenants their coverage under a good cause and their rights as clearly and as thoroughly as possible. Next slide. So when we think about communicating coverage, we wanted to make sure that we were addressing not only this binary result, like are you covered or are you not covered, but also addressing some of the nuances of people's living situations. So we have up top the likely covered scenario, which is pretty straightforward. You're covered. Here are your protections. Here are how to exercise your rights. But there are also tenants who are rent stabilized, or they live in subsidized housing, or they're part of NYCHA. Those tenants are technically, by the terms of the law, not covered, but we didn't want to give them a not covered result. We wanted to let them know that you're not covered because you actually have stronger protections. So that's what we did there with the rent stabilized, NYCHA, and subsidized results. If someone is not covered, we give them the not covered result, but we also still provide information on universal tenant rights that they can be made aware of and that they can exercise. And then the last coverage scenario is someone who receives what we're calling a might be covered result. And that scenario occurs when someone's on the screener and they answer I'm not sure for some of the questions. This is an example where maybe a tenant isn't sure of their rent stabilization status. Maybe someone doesn't know if they live in subsidized housing. And what we wanted to do is make sure that for those tenants, they're not left at a might be covered result, but we provide resources for them to get clarity around those things that they're unsure of. And so that leads us to that third principle, which is just providing resources for tenants who are unsure of aspects of their living situation. So that takes the form in this product of instructional pages for people who need to get clarity around things like rent regulation status, subsidy status, and if their landlord owns more buildings. And that's what these pages look like. And again, we'll do a demo of this product and we'll dive into some of these, or at least we'll see them in practice, but we provide guide pages for tenants to find that information so that they can update their coverage result. So I'm going to do a quick site demo. Is it all right if I take over the keyboard here? Thank you. All right, so we're on the home page. We're going to go through 2 coverage scenarios, or we're going to go through the site through the lens or through the experience of 2 different tenants. One tenant who is covered, and another tenant who maybe is unsure of certain aspects of their living situation and receives a might be covered result, and how they can get clear on some of the details and ultimately update their coverage result. So we're going to quickly go through a covered tenant's experience. We're on the home page here. We have some information about the law. We have some information about the site. But the tenant is going to enter their address here in the address page, or in the address input box. And in this case, let's just imagine that we are all tenants living at 4125 Case Street. All right, this looks right. This is our apartment. And now going to answer a few questions. Hypothetically, this is 2-bedroom apartment. I'm paying $3,000 a month. Is my apartment rent stabilized? Okay, so this is some of that dynamic help-through text that I was talking about. Public data sources indicate that 100 of the 109 apartments in my building are registered as rent stabilized. I know that actually I'm not rent stabilized, so I'm going to hit no. And is my apartment part of any subsidized housing programs? It looks like publicly available data sources do not indicate that my building is part of subsidized housing, so I am going to select no, I am not part of subsidized housing, and see my results. So this is where we get a likely covered result. I have the option to email my coverage either to myself, to a neighbor, even to my landlord to assert my rights. I can download or print my coverage just to have for my own records. And I can look further into why I got this covered result, what makes it so that I am covered by good cause. It looks like I'm hitting all of the criteria of the law. We have on the left the criteria of the law, on the right details of my living situation. And then the protections that I have. All right, so it looks like I have a right to limited rent increases. Okay, based on my $3,000 a month, it looks like my landlord can only raise my rent to $32.64 when I get a new lease, which is good to know. I have a right to stay in my home and have some information on how to assert my rights. I'm not going to jump into all of these just for the sake of time, but wanted to give a good idea of, what a result page looks like. So now we're going to do a new search, and this is through the experience of a tenant who maybe is unsure of certain aspects of their living situation. So this tenant is going to live in Brooklyn at 228 Atlantic Avenue, right? We're surfacing the map here. Looks good. Now I'm going to answer a few questions. Let's say I'm also living in a 2-bedroom apartment, paying $3,000 total. Is my apartment rent stabilized? I'm not sure. So I'm not comfortable saying yes or no. Is my apartment part of any subsidized housing programs? Publicly available data sources do not indicate that my building is part of subsidized housing programs. So I'm gonna hit no. My building is not subsidized. Does my landlord live in the building? I know that my landlord does not, so I'm gonna hit no. And does my landlord own more than 10 apartments across multiple buildings? I'm not sure of that. So in this case, it's telling me that there are 5 apartments in my building. Good cause only applies to tenants whose landlord owns 10 apartments total. Well, I'm not sure if my landlord owns 10 apartments, so I'm going to hit I'm not sure. So in this case, a tenant receives a might be covered result. And we can see in this table why they received the might be covered result. Basically, we're not sure about the rent stabilization status, and we're not sure about the landlord portfolio size. I hit every other criteria, but it looks like there are still 2 things that I need to verify. So this is where we provide links to those instructional pages that I had kind of touched on earlier. And for the sake of time, again, I'm not going to go through each one of these instructional pages, but I'll just show a quick overview. This is the page that allows people to understand if they're rent stabilized, give them instructions on requesting rent history, attending clinics. But then I'm going to go back to my result, and I am going to look at how I can find if my landlord owns more than 10 apartments. This is the landlord portfolio size instruction page. So to meet good cause eviction landlord portfolio size requirement, I need to find out if my landlord owns more than 10 apartments. It looks like there's a video. We offer a video here to instruct people how to go about these steps. And it looks like there's 2 steps I need to follow. I need to confirm my landlord's name and signature. And again, for the sake of time, we are not going to go in depth on these steps, but we can imagine that, all right, I've looked at these documents, I've found my landlord's name, and now I just need to find my landlord's name on documents for other apartments and hopefully, find a total of more than 10 apartments. Again, for the sake of time, let's just pretend that I've opened this agreement. I found my landlord's name on the 224 Atlantic Ave documents, and that means that my landlord does actually, in fact, own more than 10 apartments. So that means I can adjust my survey answers, go right back to the survey. Let's say that I did find out that my apartment's rent is not rent stabilized. My landlord does own more than 10 apartments. update my results, and now I find out that I am in fact covered. So that is a really quick demo of the site. There's a lot more. We just kind of scratched the surface, but wanted to give an overview of the two different flows for two very different tenant living situations in New York. I'm going to jump back to the to the slideshow and hand it over to Giwan, who is going to talk about how we leveraged data and open data to build some of those features and tools that we just saw in the demo.
All right. Next slide, please. Awesome. So a lot of the helper text and the result pages that you saw are driven by some of the open data sources that we are using. So what are the sources and the data sets that we actually use for this product? A ton of it comes from NYCDB. I think a lot of you were in the previous session, so you might already know what NYCDB is, but basically it's maintained by the Housing Data Coalition, and it has all of the data sets that is housing related, sort of loaded into Postgres and ready to go for any sort of analysis that you want to do. And it's maintained by a group of volunteers, which is incredible. And NYCDB is sort of the foundation and bedrock for a lot of the products that JustFix uses. So it's critical for who owns what, and it's critical for this product as well. And we'll have these slides linked in the sketch, so you can access these if necessary. But I've written down some of the data sets that we use most frequently from NYCDB for this particular product. Notably, they're Pluto, Acris, a lot of like property data, rent stabilized buildings data, NYCHA buildings data, and certificate of occupancy data from Department of Buildings. And that's already in NYCDB, so we didn't have to do extra cleaning. So thank you, HDC. Secondly, we added this new database to NYCDB, and it's the NYU Furman Center's subsidized housing database. You saw Corey share some of the subsidized housing questions that came up in our screener, and that's this drives the helper text and the determinations for the subsidy statuses. And lastly, we have the FOIL requested data, and I'll go over that a little more in the next slide. All right, so we had to file one FOIL request. FOIL is Freedom of Information Law, and we were able to just go to openrecords.gov and submit a request to the Department of Buildings, in particular for the certificate of occupancy data from 2009, January 1st to, I think we requested it for the end of 2012 as well, or anything they also had before 2009. And the reason being was because in the open data portal, certificate of occupancy data was already available. It was already on NYCDB, but it only went as far as 2012. And like 20 minutes ago, when you saw like that giant wall of exclusions for good cause eviction, one of the clauses is that your building has to have a certificate of occupancy that is issued before 2009. So the open data that we had available was incomplete for us to actually use as a determination. So we had to request additional info from DOB. And the request process was fairly straightforward, and we got approved and got the CSV probably within like a month's turnaround time, which is really cool. And now that additional data has been added to NYCDB. All right, so let's talk a little more about the usage of open data. There's three main places that we use open data to guide our products. So first, we help users with what I would consider are more technical questions when they go through the screener. And for me, some of those questions would be something like, is your apartment rent stabilized? If you don't know the answer to this question, next. We could have helper text that is surfaced. For instance, the first thing we do is to check if your building has a tax incentive. And we pull that data directly from the subsidized housing database. So if your building receives the 421A tax incentive or J52. I might be mixing up the numbers there, but we check for those two tax incentives because that means that every unit in the building is going to be rent stabilized, and that is a 100% sure thing. So we first surface that, and if your building, is qualified for that, then hopefully the helper text nudges you to answer yes. And yeah, so that's this one example. And next, we then surface if we see rent stabilized apartments recorded in your building. So that information comes from the scraper that JustFix, a justice engineer a couple of years ago built. It's called Department of Finance Property Tax Bill Scraper. And that essentially, once a year, we run this scraper for about a month straight. And it scrapes every single property tax bill that is a HPD registered property in the city of New York, because on the property tax bill is where we can actually get a count of rent stabilized units for that building. And I don't believe there's really anywhere else you can find that information. It's like not on open data. So it's kind of has to go through this arduous process, but we run it once and then we have it for the year. And then the next year when the new tax bills are released, we do it again. And that's how on Who Owns What, we're able to then track the trends and the counts of rent stabilized units in the city. But through that, we're able to then surface if some of the buildings in your apartments are or in your building are rent stabilized, or if all of them are rent stabilized, which, the second option would be really nice because then it tells you exactly what to select. Another technical question, or I consider it a technical question, is asking the user if the apartment is a part of any subsidies. That I feel like a lot of owners would know, but not necessarily all the tenants. So for us, it was really critical to surface helper text here. And first, once again, we use the subsidized housing database to surface if there are any subsidies that the apartment is receiving or the building is receiving. So for instance, we can surface if they're receiving the low-income housing tax credit, LIHTC. Next. We could also surface if the building is part of an HPD subsidy program, and also Mitchell-Lama. There's also a couple of other things we can surface through the subsidized housing database, but that is not from the city, so it's not 100% comprehensive. But it gets us pretty far in terms of surfacing the granularity of details that we want to show the user. A second data source that we use to surface helper text here is the NYCHA scraper. That is also in the JustFix GitHub. Once a year, we'll run a NYCHA scraper when NYCHA releases the list of buildings that are NYCHA properties for that year. Then we run the scraper and update the list of buildings that are considered a NYCHA development. And we're able to surface if your building is a part of NYCHA here. So now that you've seen how we guide users through the screener itself, let's talk a little more about what the data-driven insights look like on the results page itself. So once you get to the result page of, you might be covered, you're likely covered, etc., there is a criteria table that we surface of these are the criteria that you met or didn't, or you have more research to do. And there were some criteria that are really critical to determining your eligibility, but we didn't feel would be necessarily helpful to surface them as questions that are user-facing. And in conjunction, if we felt like the data sources were accurate, credible, and complete enough, then we just sort of took care of it on the back end and surface it as a part of your results. So one of the examples would be, type of building that you live in. Once again, in that giant list of exclusions, if you live in a condo, co-op, and I think there's a couple of other exclusions like manufactured housing, then you are not eligible for good cause. instead of asking the users like, what sort of building class building do you live in, we just sort of surface it for them because that's on Acris. And we felt that that was pretty complete. And the second criteria result that we sort of take care of on the back end is the certificate of occupancy data that I was talking about earlier with the FOIL request. Once again, your building has to have received the certificate of occupancy before 2009. So instead of asking the users like, do you know about your C of O? Like, we just tell you if you don't qualify. And now that we've talked about the screener and the results page, let's talk about the next steps page where, if you get a might be covered result, then you have to do a little more research to figure out if your landlord owns more buildings and more units in the city. So once again, this scenario would really only come up if you get a might be covered result where your building itself is a less than 10 unit building, and you have to figure out, you have to like meet that threshold. The 10 is the threshold, so you have to find out, are there other buildings in the area that your landlord owns that will get you over that 10 so that you might be good cause eviction qualified. And we'll go into the case study. I'm going to take over the computer for a second. We'll also share this link later. Don't go to the demo GCE screener, please. Our prod sec is not working on the CUNY server, so we'll give you an actual link. All right, so this is the guide page that Corey was showing earlier of finding out if your landlord owns other buildings. He went through this pretty in depth, but first, you confirm for your own building your landlord's name and signature. And we're still working on some of the language for this, but like the landlord name in the lease is not necessarily always the owner of the building. So that's why in step one, we like have them like verify and confirm that like who is the person that actually owns your building. So once you have that name, and to find that name, you go through these documents. These documents are surfaced from Acris, and how we are surfacing specific documents for folks to look at is by first looking at when the last deed transfer is, because that will show us the last ownership. And from that deed transfer date, then we'll look at the most recent documents from that date that are either mortgages, agreements, or assignment of leases and rents. So those are three types of documents that we're looking for on Acris to surface to tenants, because these are the documents that are the most likely to have the ownership information on them. And that insight we got from the multiple user sessions we had with our legal partners. So yeah, this is a curated list, I think, is what I'm trying to get at. And so once you go through these and find who your landlord is, then you go to step 2, where you can then look for other buildings that your landlord might own and get you over that threshold of 10. So in this case, we need to find that your landlord owns 4 additional apartments across other buildings. That's our key here. So in this specific case, we've got 91 buildings that we're surfacing that your landlord may own. Now, we don't want to waste our users' time. We want this list to be as prioritized as possible for them to just hopefully go through maybe 2 or 3 of these accordions and then find out like, okay, great, I found another building that my landlord owns. I'm done here. So I want to talk a little bit about the methodology that was used to surface and prioritize these buildings. Okay, so the list of buildings and how we decide to surface them are kind of done in 3 separate buckets. So we define 3 different universes of related buildings. So first, we look at Pluto, where we try to look at the building in question and find buildings that have the same owner name in Pluto. And to make sure that we don't cross-match with like people with similar names, we actually only look for the same owner name if it's like a corporation name, so an LLC. So that's one universe of buildings that we're defining that are related. The second universe is we find other properties that the building appears alongside on an ACRIS document. So if there's like a multi-property mortgage or an agreement, if it's one document with multiple addresses, it's probably going to be owned by the same person. So we surface that through ACRIS. That's the second universe. And then the third is we look through our own portfolios that we have generated for who owns what, which already tells us a general idea of how the number of related buildings and what they are. And with that portfolio list of buildings, we sort them by geographic distance, and we also match them for the exact name and business address that's on the HPD registration. And the geographic distance sorting in particular also came about because our legal partners told us that, if they're trying to figure out if their tenants are good cause qualified, they'll also we kind of walked with them through the manual process they take, and they said, we'll look around the address that we're looking at and see what's proximal. So we sort of tried to translate that into our surfacing algorithm. Okay, so that was a lot, but so hopefully, you can revisit the slides. But once again, to summarize, where we leverage open data throughout the product, it's in the survey itself, in the criteria table once you get the results, and in the additional research that someone might have to do. So that's pretty much what our product does. But now I want to talk a little bit about the challenges that we are facing. And next. Most of the challenges that came about during development, we were able to resolve through that iterative process with tenants, organizers, and our partners. But now that the product is pretty much almost to launch, these are the two things that are sort of remaining. One is that, the process that I just walked you through of having to research your landlord's portfolio, that could be an arduous task. So if you're a tenant that is living in a smaller building, that almost feels unavoidable. And we have that YouTube video of how, folks at JustFix would walk through that process. But even still, it's a pretty, especially if you've never been on the ACRIS site, it looks like it's from 1995. It's really hard. So we anticipate that there could be some friction there for our users once they hit that page. And, go back. And the second challenge, which is a more interesting policy question, is that the certificate of occupancy that I keep referring to, that is actually a proxy that the policy language is using for a year that the building was actually built. They're not the same thing. But at some point, I don't know when, the conversations for this bill went from, let's exclude buildings that were built after 2009 to let's exclude buildings that have certificate of occupancies that are issued after 2009. And that is really interesting because that might actually result in us moving away from the intent of the law itself. So at least in New York City, certificate of occupancies aren't issued that often, or reissued that often. But if it is reissued, it's it could happen if your building is going through major construction, like a building-wide change. So even if your building was built in 1920, if you have a new certificate of occupancy, then you're not qualified for good cause. And on a bigger scale, good cause eviction law is a statewide law, and certificate of occupancies are kind of issued a lot more leniently elsewhere in the state, which means that a lot more tenants could be excluded from protections that good cause could be providing because of this mismatch and this technicality. And HA4A, Housing Justice for All, like is aware of this, and I believe they're like trying to fix it. But in the meantime, like as other municipalities in the state are adopting good cause, like this could become a bigger blocker that kind of blocks people out from getting protections that they deserve.
Thank you, Dion. I'm going to kind of close this out with a few iterations and possibilities as we think about how this product may evolve. So first, helping tenants more effectively assert their good cause rights. When I did the product demo, I kind of shared that when you get your result, we have the ability to we give tenants the ability to download their result or email their result, potentially to their landlord. But a really great next step would be to generate legally vetted letters for tenants to send to their landlords as a way to exercise their rights and as a way to assert their coverage. This is something that we could maybe take a page out of the letter of complaint playbook that we have, that Yuan shared way early in the presentation. But it would be a really great addition to this product so that someone isn't just aware, but they have the confidence of sending a legally vetted letter to their landlord. The next thing would be just expanding beyond NYC. So open data law in NYC is so crucial to this tool, as you saw. But no such legislation exists statewide, and this is a statewide law that's meant to cover not just tenants in New York City, but tenants in New York State as well. That would be a great way if we can figure out a way to kind of expand beyond New York City. That would be a great next step. And so we are going to share this link with you. The URL is goodcausenyc.org, but just want to note that this is kind of an early release at the School of Data, so would really encourage you or ask not to circulate this link to anyone else, but wanted to give you the opportunity to explore the site, play around with it, potentially even be made aware of your own coverage. So I think that's all. Thank you. Oh, last thing. I wanted to shout out Steve Giordano and Maxwell, who also worked very hard on this project as well. So I want to... Questions? Oh, yeah.
My question was just how long did this entire process that you described take?
When did we start working them?
I think we were seriously working on it starting like August.
Yeah, August. So not 8-9 months, I'd say. The law passed in April. We were approached by HJ for Housing Justice for All and State Senator Salazar shortly after that. And I don't think, August, September, I'd say, is when we first started. And now we have like a pretty good, quote, MVP. But we obviously look to continue to iterate and evolve.
I would say the whole development process took about 5 months. So the product has been kind of ready to go by late January of this year. But we are, we are doing user testing, and that is giving us a lot of insights that, like, despite us having a lot of helper text that we surface, people are still getting tripped up by, like, when you have an "I'm not sure" option as an answer, they'll click that, and that's kind of tripping folks up. So we're still kind of stuck there, and that's why we feel comfortable sharing this link, but it's not like widely being circulated just yet.
Hi, I just wanted to know what kind of metrics are you being for seeing if the volume of usage that this is getting, or what success measurements you're using?
Don't dare to respond. Oh, no, sorry.
That's a good question. I think as a team internally, we're still talking about that, but One thing to note here is that we are storing the data of people answering the questions, so like how they answer, so that we know how accurate what we're presenting to them is, but nothing else is being stored. So like nothing personally identifying. As you saw, we don't ask anything. We just ask like, we don't even ask your unit number, right? Yeah, just like what building do you live in? So yeah, I think our success metrics
Yeah,
still TBD.
Yeah.
Yeah. Probably just how much it's being used. And then we'll probably just do like some analysis of like where people are using it most, and also how many people are actually getting covered by this. And does it match to our expectations of how many folks we thought would be covered by something like this?
Oh.
Yeah, my question is, you talked about a lot of the volunteer managed data sources that you all used, and especially the ones that were auto-populated on the back end. How did you determine the completeness and the reliability of those data sources?
I feel like the way we gathered like what we feel comfortable as like a more complete data source is through sheer experience of having used them. So I'm fairly new still to the housing data like space. I joined this organization like 2 years ago, but my colleague Maxwell has been doing this for like 10 years. So he has a lot more of a sense of like, oh, this is more complete, this is probably not. But other than that, I think we generally take everything that comes from open data just sort of at its face value.
Thank you so much for actually putting this together. Outside of New York City, like upstate New York, what website or what type of help tenants have upstate? I understand it's a state regulation, right? But you said that this particular website is mostly for New York, and it's right, New York City, to be very clear. So, do you know of any website or any assistance outside of New York City that can do the same job as the Good Cause NYC?
Yeah, that's a great question, and unfortunately, there's no website that's going to do something similar. But there are plenty of organizations and people that can, help provide clarity around their coverage situation. Those being with Justice for All, that New York City. I know Housing Justice for All is a great one here in New York City. But yeah, it unfortunately has to rely on organizations and actual outreach to people and orgs. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for presenting this. I was wondering about, like, with regards to rent stabilization, you said with the certificate of occupancy data, you were pretty easily available or able to boil that from the Department of Buildings. I'm kind of wondering, like, why we can't do that to the Department of Finance for rent stabilization. Surely it exists somewhere in like a structured manner. So yeah, just curious why we had to like scrape that for a month.
I actually don't have a satisfying answer for that. Yeah, I don't know why we scrape it. I assume that there is a reason why we can't foil it, because there is no way we would, like, I think JustFix has been scraping this data for at least 5 years. So yeah. Sorry, that's not satisfying. I'll find out.
thank you so much for this presentation, and this is really, really exciting. I don't have any question, only just 2 comments. One to your question. So I work for HPD, and even we as an agency can't access the list of all of the apartments that are unstabilized because it's a city data set. Sorry, it's a state data set, and they don't share it with us even. So that's just one thing to like flag in terms of the infrastructure of what's available. And I also just wanted to say, looking at like the statewide level, again, I really appreciate that when there's a question of how many units your landlord owns, maybe that's getting in the way of knowing if you qualify for, because it says you may not be covered, or it doesn't say no, because it's possible also your landlord owns units outside of New York City that we also can't access that information. So I really appreciate that you don't like say no, because we don't know. There's possible other units they own, like on Long Island or Rockland or Westchester. So thank you.
Sure. There's a question behind you, actually.
I know right now this link isn't ready to be spread like far and wide, but when it is there going to be any outreach or canvassing effort throughout the 5 boroughs so that tenants know a tool like this exists?
Yes, absolutely. We have been working with the coalition of housing orgs, and so they know that this product is in development. So once this is done, we'll be circulating it to all of our partners and our e-list. So we definitely will be doing as much outreach as we can, but absolutely, like if you want to be a part of, if any of you want to be a part of our e-list, we don't really send emails that often, so we will not spam you. But this is a little janky, but you can write your email with this expo marker on the whiteboard, and we'll send you when this is ready to go, so that if you're really excited about this product, you can send it to everyone that you know. But yes, we're really hoping to get this out far and wide.
Yeah, more of a general question, but just out of curiosity, what are some of the other initiatives that JustFix is working on? And more of a, I guess, prioritization question, like how does JustFix like pick which projects to work on? Like, is it more like request based, or are there more like internal things that you already have planned for the future?
I can answer the first part of that question. I think so first of all, we're constantly kind of iterating on our existing tools, but coming up in April, May, one of the tools that we have on Who Owns What is called Building Alerts, and that allows people to sign up for a building and get a weekly email of the numbers of 311 complaints, HPD violations, and eviction filings that building has received in the past week, and that happens every week. And we're developing something that is more geographic based, where someone can sign up for not only one building, but a geographic area, right? And get a weekly email that is highlighting a select list of buildings in that area that might deserve attention or might be in need of outreach. So that is what we're working on currently, and we're looking to launch that, at least the first version of that, by May. And as far as the second part of the question, how do we choose what projects to work on, and is it just request based? I'm actually quite new to JustFix, been here just under a year, so I can't speak to the previous projects, but maybe D1 can provide some context and color.
Yeah, so JustFix, I think, initially was working on a lot of like tenant-facing tools only. And then when COVID happened, a lot of requests came in to help folks stay in their homes, help them declare hardship. So a lot of that was request-based. The products that we work on are really prioritized through like what our partners' needs are and what is most urgent. So especially when COVID was first starting, like we had a lot of different product requests, and we did have a lot of those tools up, which are now deprecated. And since then, I think how we prioritize our tools is by figuring out what will bring the most impact to the most number of people. And we work very closely with organizers. So the product that Corey's talking about, that's the next iteration of a tool that we already have. But aside from that, we do work based on data requests as well. We get them fairly often from elected offices, from our partner organizations, whether it's like a one-time data pull of, something to inform their process or something that's a little more longer term. It really depends.
What tech stack did you guys use?
Good Cause is on Vite and just JavaScript, React. I don't know if there's Node in it. I don't think there's Node in it. And most of our WoW is or Who Owns What as the tool itself is also on a similar tech stack. It's on Node and JavaScript, React. But a lot of the database work is done on PostgreSQL. And NYC DB, I think, is also just PostgreSQL. Yeah.
Can you break down how many people it took to build this, engineers, users that you tested with?
Sure. Most of this was built by Corey was the only designer on this. Maxwell was the main engineer, and Steve helped do a lot of the scaffolding and the components that we use, and then I helped at the end of final things and cleaning things up. So maybe a core team of 2.5 or 3 people over 5 months of pretty dedicated 8 hours of work probably.
And then also you had asked users and things like that. We also had a series of workshops with our partners and organizers and people who are more kind of embedded in the housing justice space. Yeah, we had a series of 3 of them. I think within those workshops there were probably 8, 9, 10 experts that we were constantly kind of getting feedback from and insight from. And then as far as user testing, to date, we still have plans for more, but we did 3 rounds of user testing throughout the development of the product to date. And within each round, probably tested with 10 users. Yeah.
So when it comes to classification of whether or not someone is covered by good cause, do you find that it's worse to tell someone that they're not covered or worse to tell them that they're covered and they're not? And the reason why I ask this is because you mentioned that people in smaller apartments have to do a lot more work. So I'm wondering what if you told them yeah, you're covered, and then put the onus on the landlord to kind of respond, so to speak. And so I'm just curious about, those types of things.
Yeah, I think the biggest principle was to make sure that we're not being misleading. And I think if we were to give someone a covered result, that may inspire, I think, more interaction or action towards the landlord. So that's a great point. But ultimately, it would feel a bit misleading if, the tenant did go through the landlord and realize that they were actually not covered. Or it may just even develop further tension between a tenant and a landlord because of that, if the tenant is under the impression that they're covered. And so there's a lot of reasons for that. But yeah, what we wanted to do is make sure that we're saying you're likely covered, you're likely not covered. Because even if someone's getting a not covered result, we kind of caveat that with the likely phrase because I think you had said, there's chances where someone receives a not covered result, but they very well could be covered. And that's why we also have that might be covered scenario as well. Yeah.
That's
Probably our last question.
Thanks for this presentation. I had a couple of questions if it's possible. I'll try to say up quickly. I think one is just if you have thought about optimizing it for search in Google, if someone doesn't know about good cause law, but just is facing an eviction and is trying to find resources. And if you've also thought about it as a data collection product. So collecting data around who might be facing evictions?
The first question about search engine optimization, it's a great question. We struggle with that all the time. I don't think we currently have a plan of how we wanted to do SEO so that it surfaces as much as possible. We're just hoping that a lot of the traffic from like organic search and also like just sending it to our partners and their networks will drive most of the engagement. And sorry, could you remind me what your second question was?
Oh, just around like if it could be a data collection mechanism is about like to create products that could help people understand where evictions might be happening or could.
Gotcha. So in terms of knowing like where evictions might be happening, that information is actually already available through NYCDB and also on Who Owns What. So on Who Owns What, I believe you can see evictions filed there. And if you subscribe to like your building, you can then get weekly updates on if there are new eviction filings that week or eviction filings that are lagged but are being posted that week. But aside from that, the data collection that we are doing with this is just to sort of verify like the accuracy of the results that we're giving. So it's more of like a checking ourselves, but not necessarily like I don't think we have more plans on what to do with the data that we are collecting from the users who do use this. Thanks, everyone.